Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, I feel I've spent my entire week here talking about the past of the National Theatre. And rather brilliantly, tonight we have our director, Nicholas Hytner, and of course, Rory Kinnear, who's just finished a fantastic performance as Iago in this very room. In 1963, 22nd of October, 50 years ago, the National opened in its temporary home in the Old Vic with a production of Hamlet directed by its director, Laurence Olivier. And on Tuesday next week, 22nd of October this year, in 300 screens across the country and 20 abroad, we'll be showing once again a Hamlet directed by our artistic director, which is of course Rory's encore screenings. So it's a wonderful, fitting tribute to 50 years of the National. And brilliantly, Nick and Rory are going to do what so many now have done before and answer the 10 questions. I have the answers that you gave here, so I will happily prompt you. And we will just go through them. So we'd like to start with going back to the beginning and your earliest memories of the National Theatre. Nick, where was your first encounter with the National?
It's one of two. I've not quite managed to sort out which went before which. It was around about 1970. 70 or 71, I saw The Merchant of Venice with Laurence Olivier as Shylock and Joan Plowright as Portia in Manchester at the Palace Theatre. The National was on tour to Manchester, and it was the first and only time I saw Olivier live on stage, and I was fantastically excited by it. Excited by seeing him, excited by seeing the play. It was a wonderful production by Jonathan Miller. Olivier played Shylock as a kind of proto-Rothschild. It was very quiet, very classy. Late 19th century anti-Semitism was what Jonathan was referencing. The kind of anti-Semitism that you might have found in Paris if you were a Rothschild or an Efrusi, if you've read There with the Amber Eyes, or Proust. And I do remember that on arriving, and I was with my father, we found ourselves in the middle of a huge synagogue social. Lots of friends and relations. And Olivier was obviously aware who was in the house, and at the end he made a curtain speech. And the curtain speech was almost more memorable than the performance, because the curtain speech was about how thrilled he was to be in Manchester on this particular night, and how devoted he was to the entire Hebrew race. And he'd always felt, from the bottom of his heart, that Shakespeare was a great admirer of the Jews, and on this he was definitely wrong. But it was very, very charming. It was really charming. Yeah. And then at round about the same time, I was on a visit with my family to London, and I must have left them doing something one afternoon, because I know I went on my own, and I was 14. I know I went on my own to a matinee at the Old Vic, knowing I wouldn't be seeing Olivier, which was disappointing, but I saw Coriolanus with Anthony Hopkins as Coriolanus in what I now know was a very troubled production. Mm-hmm. It had been conceived for Christopher Plummer. 2 directors from the Berliner Ensemble had been brought over. They did Brecht's production. It was very unhappy, but first time I'd seen Hopkins, first time I'd seen the play, kind of blew me away. So those are my 2.
And I think it was Merchant of Venice first, just we got the dates. It's 10th of May, 71, and that...
In Manchester?
Yeah, and Coriolanus opened actually the week before, so you must have caught it. You must have caught it afterwards.
Okay.
And Rory, your first time.
First experience with the National Theatre was was here, but was probably the canteen, to be honest. As with a lot of my life, when it comes to the National Theatre, my father got there first, and I do remember coming to visit him during lunch breaks of rehearsals. It was they had a series of seasons. It was 1985 that were actor-led seasons, and this was one that was led by Ian McKellen and Edward Petherbridge, and they did a repertory season of the Critic and the Real Inspector Hound as a double bill.
That was in here.
Yeah, the Duchess of Malfi and the Sherry Orchard. And I think for the Cherry Orchard, it was a Mike Alfred's production, and I think they had 16 weeks rehearsal on it. So there was a lot of canteen time. And so I think rather than waste it, we would come in and see him. But then seeing the productions themselves, it was, I think probably the first one that I saw was the Real Inspector Hound Critic double bill. And I remember there was, I guess I was 7 at the time, and there was a staircase that Selina Cadell had to fall down and break every time she fell down. I probably, if I hadn't seen it twice, I would have just presumed it was an unfortunate accident. So well did she do it. But the fact that I saw it again and realised that was something that was done every night, and that somebody built that staircase every night, and that you could fall over and not hurt yourself every night. She might have hurt herself, I don't know. That was the bit that sort of got me onto, I guess, the magic of theatre, something as prosaic as a staircase. But I think that was it for me, yeah.
And I should just say, we have a weird thing in common, is that your father at the Old Vic did a production called The Travails of Sancho Panza, directed by my father.
It is,
really
yes.
random.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And neither of us saw it.
No, well, I had a very good excuse, being 8 years from being born.
Not born. And actually, I think it probably wasn't very good, is what I've heard. There we go.
Let's not damn it
Let's
without
not
seeing it. Really.
And Nick, just first professional time here. Your first production was in here. It was Ghetto.
It was 1989. It was Ghetto by the Israeli playwright Joshua Sobol. The first professional encounter I had was a few years before that. I must have written give us a job letter to Peter Hall, or maybe not even a give us a job letter, in the days when I was a young, aspiring assistant director, and I got an appointment. I got just a kind of random appointment without any agenda, and I sat and talked to Peter Hall about Wagner and Bayreuth in the office I've occupied for the last 10 years. Then when Richard Eyre became director of the theatre, he immediately, to my intense delight, started talking to me about things I might do, and this play was sent, which was a marvellous play, if any of you saw it, and based on the records and the surviving material, the songs of the Yiddish Theatre Company in Vilna, in Lithuania. A wild expressionistic play.
It was the first play I did at university, in fact.
Ghetto,
yeah.
And intensely moving, actually mostly because we were performing the material left behind by this by this theatre company whose members had obviously been murdered. And Alex Jennings was in it as the SS commandant, and the ghetto chief was John Woodvine. Lots of marvellous actors in a very big company. Mark Addy was just, kind of, I think he was random ghetto hoodlum. And amazing performance from Linda Kerr Scott as a ventriloquist dummy. So that was my first experience directing here.
And your first professional encounter?
Well, I guess there were the various barren years of auditioning and not getting any jobs. And I guess there was part of me that had been turned on to the potentials of acting by coming here, and sort of spent my teens and early 20s so desperate to work here that I probably reeked of desperation every time I walked into an audition room.
Who turned you down?
Who turned me down? Richard
either.
Eyre turned me down. Declan, what's happened to them now?
Yeah.
Declan Donlan, another one off the Christmas card list. So yeah, by the time luckily, the first play I did, I felt like that it was Nick was directing it, and he had been to see. The whisper had gone round. We were doing a production of Mary Stuart in the West End, and the whisper had gone round that Nick was in, and I only heard the whisper after I'd given a tawdry performance, and thought, well, that's that gone for another 10 years, and got called in the next day to audition for for a play called Southwark Fair, written by Samuel Adamson in the Cotslow, and was asked to do it sort of halfway through by Nick. So that was a lot easier experience when it came to auditioning than I had had previously. And so yeah, that was the first time.
Great. Now we like to look at some people, so but not necessarily on stage. Some of our off-stage people here at the National. There are many people working here. So we ask for your unsung hero. Nick, who have you chosen?
It's terrible to ask me this question
course,
because
I know,
of course absolutely
worst.
everybody is an unsung hero
You
to
can say
me.
that. That's great.
And the people I should choose immediately are the people who work in my office, who and you are in the office that they occupy and that I occupy. But there's people who look after me, and one person in particular, Neve Dilworth, who has looked after me brilliantly for almost since the beginning of my directorship. But I'm sure every day they sit there thinking he takes us for granted. So I am going to take them for granted, and although they're the obvious choice, I'm going to say they're brilliant but not choose them, because I'm going to choose on behalf of all the production managers in the National Theatre. Since I have to name a name, Sacha Milroy, but that's because I want to talk about all the production managers, because it's not a job that people who don't work in the theatre know about very much. It's an incredibly important, difficult, high-stress job. The production manager's job is to deliver, in every particular, in full working order, the set onto the stage, the production onto the stage. A production design will be signed off at some point, and before it's signed off, the poor production manager is at the sharp end, telling the director and the designer what can and can't be done, what can and can't be afforded. Once the final design, the final production, physical production, is agreed, almost always later than we would have liked it to be agreed, production manager has to make sure that it gets here by the first day of the technical rehearsal. During rehearsals, there'll always be changes. Things crop up in rehearsal, additional things are asked for, hugely complicated things into which hours, days have been put, turn out not to be wanted after all. And then the technical rehearsal, when it starts, is really short. Sometimes a 3-hour show with a lot of technical demands that's been in rehearsal for 6 weeks, and we've all been idling through rehearsals, having a good time, exploring the text, gossiping, having long cups of coffee. You can't do that when the technical rehearsal starts, because you have maybe 6 sessions to deliver the whole thing onto the stage, and in rehearsal you've just had a taped out floor, and suddenly it's all there. And the production manager is the one who has to make sure that moment by moment it works. If it doesn't work, the production manager is always the one who's there in the firing line, getting yelled at by the director, by the designer, by absolutely everybody. An actor slips on the stage, it's the production manager's fault. She catches her heel in some non-existent track, it's the production manager's fault. The reason I've chosen Sacha in particular is because I think we shared the single most surreally hallucinatory moment of the last 10 years. His Dar Materials, which was a production manager's nightmare. It's certainly the biggest show. It was right at the beginning of my time. Certainly the biggest show that has been done here over the last 10 years. 2 plays, if you remember. One of the things we wanted to do, one of the things I wanted to do was show the machinery of the Olivier stage in all its magnificence. It had been worked on invisibly for several years, hidden under the stage, but not used. And it had a big budget, and it was a big event, and the technical rehearsal for part 1, it seemed to go on forever. And we'd already had to cancel, we'd already announced that we'd cancelled the first preview. And we got to the day of the non-cancelled preview and tried to have a dress rehearsal and run it through. This vast show lumbering around the stage, and it was potentially going to be, and ended up being very beautiful, and it must have stopped 12 times, and I sat there grim and white-faced thinking it will work, it will be fine, and at some point Sacha had to say, we can't do it tonight, it's dangerous, we can't, this thing whizzing up and down, someone will get stuck, hurt, they'll fall down the sucking great hole in the middle of the stage. So we had to go, it's something that we do very rarely and it's absolutely horrible to do. So we had to cancel a preview to which people were turning up, and the show was sold out. Yeah. Philip Pullman sat and signed books in the foyer for free. Yep. Wrote little messages, gave kids the best he could. He put on a show, but it was a terrible thing to have to do. Finally, the next day, after what seemed like an endless tech and none of us had slept, we got the first show on. And by this time, there were only, I think, 2 more previews of the first show before we got onto the second show. And during those first 2 previews, we were working all day. And the moment I'm thinking of is when we turned up on no sleep, and we were all looking like, you know, creatures from the land of the dead. We turned up for the start of the tech of the second show and realized we had another 5 days from 10 o'clock in the morning till midnight doing this huge, huge show. And we looked at each other and we started to laugh hysterically and tears rolling down our cheeks because there was nothing more horrible than the prospect of having to tech another huge show. And there was on the production manager's table, which is about there were a couple of items from the set model, and one of them was a tiny palm tree. And we used to sit, I remember this, Sasha and me, and the designer, Giles Cadle, during this tech while waiting for something to happen on stage. We held this little palm tree above our heads and tried to pretend that we were in the Caribbean. It's like that. So, but the production managers are all incredibly hardworking and incredibly imaginative. And so they are my unsung heroes.
Fantastic. Rory, you've chosen a stage manager.
Yeah, similarly, I mean, stage management are people who are there every night. They're as much as part of the company as the actors in the play. But you know, sometimes actors at the end will wave a hand towards the sound or lighting operators, but very rarely does stage management get any recognition at the end of a show. And they are, without doubt, they are also there from the beginning of rehearsals. And without doubt, they bring the play to life just as much as the actors do. And I think I've chosen the stage management here because they are unlike any stage management I've sort of come across in any other theatre, in that, that they do have an awful lot of workshops and other people at their disposal to call upon. But if you have an idea in the morning, they've done something about it by the afternoon. And that can be as simple as finding a prop to, you know, constructing a staircase. There is nothing that you can imagine in a rehearsal room that they in some way can't bring to life. And that has been a source of continual astonishment ever since I worked here. I've worked with a stage management team more than others, which is David Milling's stage management team. But I decided to choose one of that team called Ian Farmery, who in many ways to me sort of represents the whole ethos of the people that work backstage at the National, and hopefully some of the people that work on stage as well, in a level of commitment, an unshowy commitment, as well as skill and talent and energy and a sort of a creative passion, but does it without need of reward or other than putting on a decent show or to be celebrated in any way. And I chose Ian largely because during the run of Othello, and I've probably done 6 or 7 shows in which Ian has been in the stage management team. During the run of Othello, he put the wrong blanks in, and I'm sorry to highlight a fault of his, but hopefully you'll understand why. But he put the wrong blanks into the gun, and I realised over 7 shows and probably 500 performances, but Ian Farmer had never made a mistake in that entire time. And I was absolutely stunned, and I was just, Ian, you've done something wrong. And for that to have been something that I remember, it just sort of shows you how seamlessly and quietly the operation backstage goes on.
Moving on stage, individual performances by actors that have made a particular impression, Nick.
Well, I'm going to confine myself to stuff that happened before 2003 because I'm simply not going to choose between performances that have happened under my directorship. And although my first thought was Anthony Hopkins in Pravda, actually my second thought, and every thought since, has been Paul Scofield in Amadeus, which is one of the greatest performances I've ever seen. And Paul Scofield is the greatest actor I ever worked with, the most extraordinary actor I ever worked with. He was in a movie that I made of The Crucible, Arthur Miller's The Crucible. He played Governor Danforth, which I consider to be one of the great privileges of my life. Watching him work, it's completely unnecessary to say anything to him really, and actually what he wanted to be told always was the bare minimum. Move here, move there, do it faster, do it slower. But Paul managed to combine the most extraordinary technical gifts as an actor, just the most glorious voice, the most glorious instrument, which he could do anything with a real sense of mystery. God knows where it came from. He guarded that very close. He didn't want to talk about it. He wouldn't explain it, although he was a most beautifully genial, warm man. I must have stood at the back of the circle 6 or 7 times to watch Amadeus. And that performance, Paul Scofield as Salieri, I think by quite a distance is what I choose.
And Rory?
Well, yeah, I chose formative ones rather than necessarily ones that I'd been lucky enough to witness on stage. And they were 2 in reasonably close succession, which was Hopkins in Pravda and Ian Charson in Hamlet, which was the 2 performances that turned me on to what could be special about acting rather than just the writing and the craft of putting on plays. The direct attack on the heart and the senses that you can achieve as an actor. And I saw Ian Charleston's Hamlet very, very soon before it finished and before he passed away, and was probably 11 at the time, so was unaware of how ill he was or indeed what he was dying from, but heard some of the ushers speaking about it. And having experienced that performance and then to discover what he was battling against, and that the play itself speaks so eloquently about both the imminence of death and the futility of life, as well as its difficulties, sort of left an indelible impression. And Hopkins in Pravda was just, that's what magnetism is, and it's something probably he doesn't have to work on. It just was electric.
Okay, just going to mention someone who I'm very glad didn't see Hopkins as Pravda. Just briefly, my day to day, because I'm now deep into delivering the 50 Years on Stage show on November the 2nd. She'll be 9 o'clock, BBC 2, switch on. Today's rehearsal schedule started with Bedroom Fast, Penelope Wilton and Nicola Prevost. Then it was Pravda, Ralph Fiennes in the Hopkins role. Then it was Stuff Happens, Alex Jennings and Lloyd Owen. Then it was My Fair Lady, Alex and Malcolm Sinclair and Rosalie Craig doing Eliza. Then it was Jerry Springer the Opera. And I think I've missed one out, but it's been a long day, a big day. What we're going to do with a lot of these scenes, none of these scenes that you're going to see, there's about 25 of them live and about another 8 of them from the archive over 2 hours. Some of them need setting up for audiences that don't know the plays that the scenes are from, and I'm just going to assume that certainly on TV people don't need to know a thing. Just little 30, 60-second intros. And I've asked actors who are going to take part in the clip, in the scene, to introduce them. So Derek Jacobi and Michael Gambon are introducing a scene from No Man's Land. and their introduction is worth switching on for in itself. And their performance in No Man's Land, well, you can imagine.
Yeah.
But Rafe, I asked him to introduce Pravda, and he introduced it by saying, I never saw Anthony Hopkins as Lambert LaRue, which is lucky really, because if I had, I would not be putting myself in the firing line now and playing the part for you tonight. So I'm very glad he didn't.
Yeah. A great moment.
Yeah.
And of your own work, what if you have to single one, if you have to, what would be the most fulfilling project you've worked on, Nick?
Impossible. I'm gonna pick two from the, and I'm not, forgive me, gonna pick Hamlet or Othello or Southwark Fair or Man and Maud, because the very fact that you're sitting here means that you are physically special to me. Right? Quite deliberate that you're sitting on my left. It shows that you're and just putting it to one side, all too special even to be contemplated.
I'm changing my answer.
Yeah. I'm going to say Much Ado About Nothing and The History Boys are the two for because not because they're necessarily the best, but they both gave me such intense pleasure. It was so much fun working on them. The History Boys because I knew it was a special play. I didn't know it was going to be as popular as it was, and you know there were the usual frustrations, but bringing that to life and knowing that the cast was also good, and then the first preview of The History Boys was just so exciting when you realised from a minute and a half in that the audience were having the best time they'd ever had. And Much Ado because I think it is the most glorious play, and we, all of us involved in it, kind of were approaching it at the right time of our lives in the right spirit. So those two.
And Richard Griffiths, we should just talk of him in that role as Hector. It was what a great performance.
It was a great performance, and I'd never worked with him. I barely knew him, and sent him the script. And I found recently Richard's wife Heather told me, and one of his sons told me, he was inclined not to do it. Heather had to twist his arm. And he came and sat on my sofa and moaned for about 45 minutes about how little the National Theatre pays. And there was not much I could say because we don't pay brilliantly. But I did say to him, you know, you really would regret it if you don't play this part. And of course, it was the most amazing performance. And there was always the thing with Richard as well that, you know, the anecdote. He was about 10 minutes late one day because he was stuck in traffic. And Alan Bennett said, how long have we got? Because we're going to get an hour and a half now on traffic jams I have known. And we did.
Yeah, for sure. Have you changed your answer, Rory?
Desperately trying to think now. No, I chose Othello because I think for lots of different reasons. Obviously, I've only just finished it, so it's still fresh in my mind. And I tend to think that, you know, every production that you do is hopefully a progression from the last one that you've done, and also an accumulation of everything that you've learnt. So also a reason for choosing the last one. But I think in lots of ways it was sort of, I was sort of stunned the more we rehearsed how good a play it was, which seems simple enough to say and should have been self-evident, but sort of particularly just not necessarily the poetry of the writing, but just the quality of dramaturgy of structure that was breathtaking, and the fact that the way that Nick chose to do it. From the off, when you saw the set, you thought, "Oh yes, this is going to work," which is not always the case. But you thought, no, you would. Every stage of that production, you got more and more excited by, and it's rare. You know, I said after about a month of doing it, I could feel it was getting a little bit flabbier than it had been, and I said to our assistant director, "Listen, you don't get that many opportunities to be in productions that have an effect like this on an audience," and the fine line between having a really good evening at the theatre and something that will, you know, maybe be in people's, you know, memories when they do another 50 years of these, is infinitesimally small. But we have to keep on the right side of it because we've been given the opportunity to be in a production that hopefully will last in people's minds. And that was as much, it represented everything that I think theatre should be about in terms of a coming together of everyone in the right spirit to create a piece that was serving the play, that where direction, acting, design, everything were working in unity, and it's a production I already miss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was. I'm going to say, I think it was the best thing I've ever been involved in.
Too late. Too late.
But I'm not. I used to. I'm going to be honest with you. My office is just 10 seconds away from the back of the Olivier stalls there, and I used to prefer coming in and watching the dance at the end of Much Ado than coming in and seeing all that. I mean, the end of Othello is hard to watch. It's hard to watch. So on that basis, although I think Othello was better,
the ones that got away, for whatever reasons, there are many productions that we've missed. What if you could go back and grab the one you missed, Nick? What would it be?
Very particular. Yes. And I know Hay Fever, directed by Noel Coward, with Edith Evans and Maggie Smith amongst many, has been chosen by others. Mm. But I want to see the dress rehearsal when they were out of town, I think in Manchester. And Dame Edith was, by all accounts, not an easy person. And she was a Christian Scientist, and she had a cold, and because she was a Christian Scientist, she wasn't permitted to do anything about the cold, but she was also tricky, and she decided she wasn't coming to the dress rehearsal and stayed in her room at the Midland Hotel. And they still wanted to dress rehearse, and whether Maggie Smith was the understudy or whether she simply volunteered to play Judith Bliss, I don't know. But I do know, because I've heard many times, that she went on in Dame Edith's role. And she not only played Judith Bliss, she played Dame Edith playing Judith Bliss. And by all accounts, she nailed her word by word, line by line, moment by moment. She just nailed her. And remember, Maggie was a young girl at this point. Yeah. And again, by all accounts, Noel Coward and Laurence Olivier were sitting together alone in the auditorium, weeping with laughter. Weeping with laughter. I would have loved to see that. Yeah. The upshot was that at 7:30, mysteriously, Dame Edith's cold had disappeared and she was back in the house. So.
Brilliant. And Rory, what did you miss that you would like to have seen?
The final question is about programming a day of productions that you would wish to see. And I chose 3 productions that I didn't see, just because I wanted to maintain the memory of the ones that I had seen and were special to me. So I'm struggling now to remember.
Vanya, the Redgrave Olivier Vanya.
Yes, which luckily through the power of cinema I have seen, in that they made a filmed recording of it. But the performance of Michael Redgrave in particular as Vanya in that production, just I guess, is so incredible for its spontaneity of thought and feeling, as if there is no performance to it at all, and up against the Astrophe of Olivier, which is a great performance, but it is a performance. Up against it, particularly, it's shown up on screen. That sense of a man who's wandered into this life in Russia, rather than an actor who's wandered onto stage, and I'd love to have seen what that was like in the flesh. Mm-hmm. The Amen Corner is one that I've also chosen. I don't know how I managed to miss it, because I was here at the time. But I've seen pretty much all of Rufus's plays, and that was one that seemed to slip by me. And there was another one as well.
You said Summerfolk, Trevor Nunn's Summerfolk in
yes,
here.
Again, a play that I don't know how I managed to miss, because I was at the drama school at the time, and everyone was talking about it. But managed to, and by all accounts, it was Trevor working at his absolute best with a company of actors who you sort of would die to see any one of them on stage, let alone all 20 of them.
And costumes, a particular costume. You don't have to wear it, but you can if you want. Nick, what would you have?
Well, really frustratingly, the costume I've chosen was given to our ex-chairman, Hayden Phillips as a departing gift. And I'm absolutely furious because it's a Harcourt Courtly's dressing gown from one of London Assurance. I'm quite sure Hayden wears it at home. I mean, and I would if I had it. So that's the one I want.
And Rory?
I chose the last outfit that I wore as a Fopling Flutter in Man of Mode, which was a sort of a tight white pair of jeans with some silver pointy tasseled shoes and sort of a laminated silver cummerbund with a floral shirt that was open down to the neck and these long silver necklaces. And what I loved about it was that myself and Vicky Mortimer, who designed it, found all the things actually in high street stores. so there were people actually dressing like this. And also the fact that it wasn't there in previews, that it was a costume that we thought actually probably or Nick and Vicky thought probably should give him another. He was someone who was condemned to fashion himself. So why not give him another opportunity to condemn himself in that final scene? And so over the first sort of 4 previews, we sort of got more and more elaborate and disgusting. And so yeah, I guess that both in the sense of what it was, but also how it developed and how through previews things can change.
And Nancy Carroll chose that performance as her performance. That's the one she used to watch from the wings every night.
And now I feel bad.
That's great. There you go. And the building, places in the building, secret or otherwise, that would be your favourite place, Nick?
It's gone, it's disappeared. I had a parking space outside stage door. I thought, this is the best perk of the job. Mm-hmm. Outside stage door, 1 car, mine, it's all gone because of anti-future, and it'll never come back. No. So poor old Rufus, mind you, I think Rufus cycles or runs.
He hang glides.
Yeah. So
did you have to tell the man who operates the barrier every day who you were?
Sometimes.
I have to.
Yeah, no, sometimes. Yeah.
You've been here a bit longer.
Yeah. They then also they know who's important.
Yeah.
So
they recognise that Nissan Micra anyway.
So that was my favourite spot, and it was next door to my least favourite spot, mm-hmm. which is I love this building. I think it was designed by an architect of genius, but at the northeast corner of the building is goods in, garbage compaction, dustbin, rats, and it's on one of the best piece of river frontages in Europe. That, like the parking space, have fallen victim to this wonderful building scheme that is now underway, and by the summer of next year, in place of my parking space and the dustbins, will be a beautiful new bar, wonderful new frontage to the river. So it's a sacrifice in a good cause.
Where do you park now?
Park in the car park.
Okay. And Rory, where in
It's not going to take the tube. Mine is rehearsal room 2. Just because it could have been rehearsal room 1, but it's currently closed, so there's no point going there. It's where the most excitement happens for me as an actor, where things are created, where you know what you do in that room you will be doing for the next 6 months. So it's where people have the most ideas, both as actors, directors, and stage management, where people come together for the first time, meet each other, and make connections that can last lifetimes. And just even going in there on an afternoon when no one's there, just to be able to play the piano or just to walk around or do some work, it feels a special place.
And indeed, the fantasy programming moment. So we've got your dream day at the National Theatre. You have a morning show, you have a matinee, and you have an evening show. So Nick, in the morning, what are we going to watch with you?
These are all shows I've seen.
Yep.
So I'm not, because there's plenty more I didn't see that I would love to have seen. The morning is the Nativity, part 1 of the Mysteries. Because I think not what I was expecting, didn't know really what I was coming to. Probably the first time I'd seen a promenade show, and it was unbelievably moving and uplifting and exciting, and to be there, part of the experience, was simply unforgettable, and I would love to experience that again.
There's a bit of it in the show.
There is a bit. There is. There will be a bit of it on in 50 Years on Stage. Tricky to, in a way, unreproducible, because you can't in the Olivier reproduce the experience of a promenade production in the Carousel. But nevertheless, the fact that the plays are more than 500 years old, the earliest plays written in English, that they were written for and by ordinary working people as acts of simple faith, that they are so throbbing with humanity as well as with faith, that Tony Harrison had done such a beautiful job making them accessible without actually losing the savour of the Middle English. John Tams's music, amazing. My afternoon show is part 1 of Angels in America. Angels in America, Millennium Approaches. Just because it was like being in the middle of a thundercloud. It was the most amazing play, brilliantly directed and acted, directed by Declan Donnellan, with a phenomenal cast. And at the time, it felt like a miracle that a great play, which was somehow not depressing, was being made out of what looked then like an unending cataclysm. And it was a thrilling thing to see here, thrilling. And done here, of course, before it was done in New York, before it had been done on the west coast of America, not really noticed. And it was noticed first in London. And then I'm just going to be self-indulgent in the evening because I'm going to pick Carousel. I don't need to pick The Madness of George III because, although it's not the same, there's a movie. History Boys ditto. I nearly picked The Madness of George III. I would, love to see Nigel Hawthorne on stage again. But Carousel, I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but I used to say to Bob Crowley, the designer, if there is a heaven and we find ourselves there, because neither of us are good people, it will be because of the first 7 minutes of Carousel, the Carousel waltz, because this is good. And I have a feeling the rest of it was pretty good too, but I would love to see it again. So.
Do you remember that first dress rehearsal when the ballet first got shown?
Oh God, yeah, but that was...
It was extraordinary.
We'd never seen anything like it at the National. It was the last thing Kenneth Macmillan choreographed. And he'd finished it, the Act 2 ballet, and it was devastating. So I'd love to see that again.
Rory, your dream day?
Yeah, I chose 3 things that I hadn't seen, just because all the really special things that I have seen, I've never wanted to see again, just because I've seen lots of plays here several times, and each time either sort of notice different things, and obviously had a richer experience for it. But you do tend to see slightly more the nuts and bolts of how things are put on and how actors change and how the dynamics of theatre. Whereas the sort of the moments that will remain for me forever. Julie Walters at the end of All My Sons, Anthony Hopkins at the beginning of Pravda. I never want to give them an opportunity to change that. So the productions I've chosen are ones that I've always thought I wish I had seen. So Guys and Dolls would be my breakfast, because the opportunity to see Ian Charleston in his prime, Bob Hoskins, Julie Mackenzie, Imelda Staunton, it's and as everybody says, it was one of the most glorious productions here of the 50 years.
It was great.
For lunch, I'd move on to Amadeus to see. It was either that or John Gabriel Bjorkman, to see Schofield in his full throttle and full prime. I never got to see him on stage, and something that I'll always regret. One had opportunities because one was alive, but I didn't. And I'd like to have been the first time that play was put on without knowing the play with you. And my dinner would be Gambon's View from the Bridge, which I didn't realise was in the Kutzler. And which, when I discovered, sort of made me miss it all the more. And it's a production I've actually often thought about in my head, because Gambon was sort of was my hero growing up. So that the notion of being able to see him in that part, which you could just, I mean, you can imagine, but to see it in the Cotslow, to see that talking about raw magnetism with Hopkins, to see that raw magnetism up close, God, I wish I'd have been there. Yeah.
Luckily, Usher on first preview,
Really? Yeah.
and that, I don't know if anyone else was there, that the applause, that it was a conspiracy among us all. We would not clap until they'd come back, literally from their dressing rooms. They had to be going brought back. It was minutes and minutes of applause till they returned. We would not stop. And it was quite extraordinary in the Cotslow.
Yeah, and this also gives, and the story that all the actors in their dressing rooms gave him a round of applause from their dressing rooms. And he always says that, whether he believes it or not, he never really believe anything he says particularly, but that he didn't feel he'd done anything until then. That was the first time that he thought, oh, maybe I've done something with my life. And he was, in his 40s then, so.
I'm happy to change my day for his, actually.
I'll do both.
I saw all three of them, and I'd really love to see them again. They were all as good as you think they were.
Well, you can swap them over, that's all fine.
Yeah.
Talking of Gambon, so thank you. On Tuesday, on our actual anniversary, Nick, you're going to be in the chair to talk about the Old Vic days with, among others, Mike Gambon and Jerry McEwen and Ronnie Pickup and Sheila Reid and Gordon Granger, talking about the early days, and actually particularly working on stage with Sir Lawrence, which will come out a lot. And then we've got a matinee version of this because Ken Cranham so wanted to do it, but he's rather busy doing a play by Rory Kinnear. So we've had to do a 3 o'clock, and he'll be joined by Leslie.
Don't tire him out.
Sorry, we'll be very gentle. But Leslie Manville's with him because she's got Mrs. Alving that evening, so those were our busy working ones. And then in the evening, back in here, Charlie Kay and Fiona Shaw, will you please join me in thanking Nick Hytner and Rory Kinnear?